Good evening and welcome again. In this lecture we will be picking up again from where we left off in the bpPlayer or the player blueprint. So if you don't already have that open, then go ahead and open the blueprint, and we will be picking up the fire rate control event. So this will be the first time we use a custom event. They are very much like functions, the only difference being that they don't gain their own graph. They need to be called in the same way, and they don't present the option to get a return input or a return value. They only receive input values. So you can, in the same way, you could give this some inputs, and when you call the event you could pass in input values as well, but there won't be any option for a return value. So they're the main differences, and we're going to use this in very much the same way. So what we can do with the event is we'll go down here and we will draw off a sequence again, and this will just allow us to split one check for the primary fire and one check for the secondary fire, or the rocket fire more specifically. So off of the first, then if we get a reference to the primary fire rate, so primary fire rate, and what we want to do is set the primary fire rate first of all, and the primary fire rate will be set to be a minus, so minus float, and we will take away the primary fire rate itself minus the reference that we have stored to the game's delta seconds. And the reason we're doing this is because in a moment we'll be resetting the primary fire rate, and what this does is it will serve as a check to make sure that the player cannot tap the button faster than the fire rate should be allowing. So for the primary fire rate, being 0.2 of a second isn't so much of an issue, but when we get to the rocket fire rate, that was every second, and you can definitely press the button several times in a second. So what that will do is, even if the player releases the button and then presses again, if this equation hasn't set the fire rate back to its original value in the time they do that, it still won't allow the player to fire. So it just gives us some control over how quickly the player ship will be firing in the game, kind of just to stop the player from cheating past what we have given as what would be classed as fair values, I suppose. And to do this we will get a branch, and we will spell that correctly, so branch, and what we want to check is whether or not, again we're going to do a less than or equal to check this time, so similar to the more than check we did earlier, but this will be checking whether a value is less than or equal to a number, and that will be once again checking the primary fire rate. So none of these are yet checking the base fire rate. All of this is to do with the primary fire rate. And we're just going to check if that is less than or equal to 0. And then if this has taken away from itself enough times to get to that value, then what we will do is we'll go back over here, that will be true, and we will allow this to call the fire button. So we will enter something called a gate, and this is another one where I think the epic description that they provide on the hover over is probably more concise than I'd be able to get the explanation to. So this allows for opening and closing a gate to control the execution flow. So that means we can toggle whether things are allowed to be accessed or not, and what we want to check is the input action we made earlier called primary fire. So if we check primary fire, and we want the action event, which will be this one, and what we will do is when the user presses the button we will open the gate, so the exit node will then start being called, and when the player's released the button we will close the gate. So it will start closed as well, so this means that this won't be called until you press the button, and then it will stop as soon as you release the button. And hopefully you can see immediately that that works perfectly for something like a fire button where you're going to hold it down anyway. This controls the holding functionality of a fire button for us quite nicely. And what we'll do is from here we will set the primary fire rate again. So again, this still isn't the base fire rate that we're talking about here. And then off of this value, the input value, what we will put is the base fire rate. So the primary fire rate base. And just to confirm, what this means is that when this has reached 0 or something less than 0, it will break this branch, so we'll get through the branch. We'll check if the player has pressed the button, and if they have, then this will set the primary fire rate, which is currently 0 or less than, to 0.2. And again, this is being called via the event tick, so it's not called by the event tick directly, but a few nodes down it is constantly being updated, which means this will then again keep going back into here. It'll be hitting the branch, it won't be true, so we'll be minusing the value from the delta seconds, which will again eventually occur in this being 0 or less than 0 again, and then we'll rinse and repeat. We'll go past the branch again, through the gate, reset this to 0.2, and we'll just keep repeating that. So that's how we're going to be controlling the fire rate in the game. And with that done, what we want to do is once we've set the rate back to be itself, we're going to branch off of here again. So you can probably see by this point that a lot of the functionality will be just checking different variables, and that's normally done with branches. And off of here, this time I'm going to use something new to us, which is a not boolean check. So get the not boolean, and from here we want to finally use the other boolean we have, which is the has power. So get has power. Now this not check is just a nice way to keep things a little bit tidier and keep the logic a bit straighter. So at the moment has power will be false because we've left that as false down here, so the tick isn't checked. And what this is saying is if you take the inverse of what this is and that checks out, then we'll do something over here. So not has power is essentially saying if you don't have the power up, then do something here, otherwise do something with the false branch. So if you haven't got the power up, what we will do is we will call our primary fire function. Remember, this is the function that we made previously, and then if this returns true, so you finally have picked up a power up, then we will do the power up fire function, power up fire. So again, that's the other function that we made earlier. So that takes care of our primary and powered up fire, which leaves our third type of fire, which will be the rocket fire. And that's very simple to do. It's for the most part going to be the same nodes we used here. So we have most of the blueprinting done up here for the checks that we want to do. The only thing is we want to do it for the rocket power up now. So this will be the next challenge I give you. So have a look at what we have up here. Just see what you can take from this, what you think might be relevant for the rocket projectile. And off of this then one node, start filling out the rocket fire functionality. Just remember that nothing's going to be functional at the moment anyway. We just need to make sure we have the correct fire rate resets in place and that we're calling the correct function at the end of a certain boolean check. I think this is going to be really useful if you can get this challenge done without my assistance. So if you go ahead and pause the video now, see how far you can get, come back and I will go through the rest with you. Okay, so hopefully you gave that a go. Now all we really need to do, if you think about it, as I said, we've got most of the functionality up here. So the first thing, if we look at what we're doing at the top, we are setting the primary fire rate. So this time we're going to want to set the rocket fire rate, because remember we already have a variable ready for that down here. So set rocket fire rate, and I wasn't lying when I said most of these values will be the same. So the next thing we'll do is a float minus a float, and again the only difference now is we will be taking the rocket fire rate away from delta seconds, so almost exactly the same as second time. With that done, we want to get a branch and do another check. So we'll do a branch, we will check whether or not a certain value is a smaller float than the other float. That will be the rocket fire rate, and we'll be checking again if that's less than 0, so nothing different there. Next we will call our gate, so we're going to get another gate. Now this bit's slightly different, but only because we will now be checking the rocket fire action event, and then this again is the same as previously, so we will check whether it's pressed, it will be open, and if it's released it will be closed. And again from here we will set the rocket fire rate to be the base rocket fire rate, which is again another value we have ready for this, so we kind of preempted this. And the only thing I've done differently at this point is because this is a slightly simpler check, it's going to be quite obvious what we're checking for even without a not boolean check. So we're going to do a branch, and this time all I'll do is I'll get the has rockets, and all I want to know is whether or not we have rockets. So if true, then we will do rocket fire, and if not, then we won't do anything. So that's really the only different thing there, and that's purely because we're not doing two different checks at this point, we're just doing one. So that reads quite well anyway. Whereas that I think reads a bit better, so that we would be doing the primary fire if you've not got power, and we'll be doing the power up fire if you do have power, is essentially what that's saying. Whereas this is just saying, does it have rocket? If it's true. If yes, then fire rocket. So there we go. That is the projectile setup ready. So again, like when we first did the movement, this won't do anything yet, but it's now ready to be utilized in the game when we start fleshing this out. So I'm going to grab this section, I'm going to comment, and I will call this the projectile control. This will control all of the projectiles for our player, so that seems to be a sensible name. So this will now be ready. The next thing we need to do will be to fill out these functions, and then that'll be ready to actually spawn the projectiles in the world. For now though, I'll leave that there, and I will see you in the next lecture.